Mercer didn't wait for an introduction. He walked straight to her case, flipped it open with one hand, and lifted Greybird out in front of the entire Unit 31 operators like he was holding up roadkill. "Wrong gun, sweetheart." He dropped it back in the case. The metal rang against the foam. "This isn't your hometown shooting range." 31 men laughed. Mara Ellison said nothing for 3 full seconds. Quietly, so quietly every man had to stop laughing just to hear her. A rifle doesn't have to impress the room. It only has to work when the room runs out of answers. She closed the case herself. If this story hits you, subscribe. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this goes. She had been driving since midnight. No escort, no welcome call. No one waiting at the gate with coffee and a handshake. Just Mara Ellison, both hands on the wheel, 11 hours of Nevada highway behind her, and Greybird in its case on the back seat, scratched stock, worn receiver, and every lesson her dead uncle had ever pressed into her with his bare hands. The MP at the gate took her credentials, looked at her face, looked at the credentials again, and reached for his phone. She waited. She had been waiting her entire career for permission, for acknowledgement, for the room to decide whether she belonged in it. She was done explaining herself to Gates. The corporal they sent to escort her was 22 years old and walked 3 steps ahead of her the whole way, which was either protocol or condescension, and she had long since stopped caring which. Task Unit Trident was already assembled when she walked into the briefing hut. 14 operators. Standing, sitting, leaning. All of them stopped what they were doing the moment the door opened, and the silence that dropped over the room had a very specific texture, not surprise, not curiosity, but the flat, evaluating quiet of men who had already formed an opinion and were simply waiting to have it confirmed. She had walked into that silence before, different rooms, different faces. Same silence. She crossed to the briefing table without asking where to sit. She sat down. She opened her mission folder. Nobody offered her coffee. Senior Chief Grant Mercer stood at the head of the table like a man who had personally built the room and therefore owned everything in it. Late 40s. Compact and dense, the kind of physical density that comes from 20 years of operating in places that compress everything soft out of a person. His face carried 3 distinct expressions at all times: command, skepticism, and a third one, harder to read, that appeared when his certainty was being tested, and he didn't want anyone to know it. Right now he was on skepticism. Chief Ellison, not a welcome. A statement of identification, the way you'd confirm the serial number on a piece of equipment you'd been issued without requesting. "You want to walk us through what you're bringing?" "After I see the terrain models," she said. A half-second pause. "We do introductions first. I've read everyone's file," she said. "We can skip introductions." The room shifted, not loudly, just a degree. The way a room shifts when someone does something unexpected in a space where expectations are enforced. Mercer's jaw moved once, like he was chewing a word and deciding not to swallow it. "Fine," he said. Terrain models. She looked at the canyon. She looked at the relay position. She looked at the wind data. And she understood immediately why every conventional solution had already been ruled out, and why she was sitting in this room with 14 men who didn't want her there. "The relay is mounted here." She pointed without standing up. 43 inches of exposed bracket partially shielded on the north face. The canyon below it runs east-west and creates a split-current wind corridor opposing directions at different elevations. Simultaneously, you get a stable window of approximately 3 seconds every 8 to 12 minutes, predictable in pattern. "Distance?" Mercer asked. She gave him the number. The recalculating silence came immediately. She had expected it. Logan Pike's voice cut through it from the far end of the table. "Current systems make that distance. Current systems make the distance," she said. "They don't make it with the subsonic load the operation requires. The acoustic suppression mandate."
"Yes."
"Subsonic at that range in a split-current corridor. With standard barrel harmonics you lose consistency. Not every shot, just enough shots to matter." Logan leaned forward. He had the easy physical confidence of someone who had spent his whole life being the best version of exactly what a room expected him to be. "So your answer is a rifle that looks like it was pulled out of a museum." "My answer is a rifle built specifically to solve this problem," she said. "Whether it looks the way you expected is irrelevant. It's relevant when 13 lives are riding on it. Then let's talk about performance, not appearance." Logan looked at Mercer. The look said, "Are we really doing this?" Mercer said nothing, and that nothing, that careful, deliberate nothing, was the first crack she saw in his certainty. Barely visible, the width of a rifle bore, but there. She opened the case. She had known what would happen. She had known before she left Colorado. She had known the way Caleb had taught her to know things not through feeling, but through pattern, through honest observation of how rooms like this one operated and what they valued and what they refused to see. Greybird was not beautiful. That was the first thing people saw, and In environments like this one, often the last thing they bothered to look past. The stock was scratched in 3 places. The receiver showed its age without apology. The custom scope mount was machined to solve a vibration problem in the original design. And if you understood that, it was the most elegant component on the rifle, but if you didn't, it just looked wrong. The kind of wrong that confirms what you'd already decided. Caleb had spent 18 months building her working evenings, working weekends, working with his hands and his knowledge, and 30 years of Navy precision shooting distilled into a single instrument that he believed that he knew could do things the current generation of systems couldn't. He'd finished her 3 years before his heart stopped in his sleep at 61. Quietly, without warning, the way he'd done most things. He left the rifle to Mara with a note tucked under the barrel. She's not for looking at. She's for when it has to count. Mara hadn't cried when she read it. She'd cleaned the rifle instead, because that was the language Caleb had taught her. When words fail, when grief is too large for any sentence, you go back to the work. You do the work carefully. You do it right. She'd been doing it right ever since. Mercer didn't ask before he picked Graybird up. That was the detail she would remember longest, not the words that came after, but the presumption of the gesture. The way he lifted it without looking at her first, without a single word of permission, as if anything in this room was automatically available to his hands. He held it up. He turned it once. His face said what it always says when a man who has decided something encounters evidence against his decision. This doesn't count. Wrong gun, sweetheart. He set it back on the table. Metal on foam, the sound traveled. This isn't your hometown shooting range. The laughter was instant and practiced. The laughter of men who had been waiting for permission to say what they were thinking. Logan's was the loudest, bright and certain, completely comfortable in itself. Several others followed. 1 or 2 near the back just smiled, which was worse somehow, the quieter agreement. Mara did not look at any of them. She looked at Mercer. A rifle doesn't have to impress the room, she said. It only has to work when the room runs out of answers. She closed the case. She sat down. The laughter stopped, not because anything was resolved, but because she had removed herself from it so completely that there was nothing left to laugh at. She was already somewhere else. She was already thinking about the canyon. Mercer watched her for 3 full seconds. Then he looked away. Day 1 was designed to break her. Not officially, not on paper. But she had been in enough of these environments to recognize intentional pressure when it was applied to her and ordinary training when it was applied to everyone else. Mercer paired her with Logan for every exercise. He assigned her the overwatch position with the worst angle, the longest exposure, the most brutal afternoon wind. He timed her on tasks that had not been timed for anyone else. She performed everyone. Not perfectly, and that was important. That was the thing she had learned that most people in her position never did. Perfection at this stage would have been its own kind of lie. She made the calls that could be made. She flagged the ones she needed more data on. And when she was wrong, she said so before anyone else could. On the range, Logan ignored her first wind call. Set up independently. Fired. Missed by 4 inches left. She said nothing. She watched him adjust. He fired again. Hit. He didn't look at her. She didn't need him to. On the 3rd repetition, she gave the wind call 2 seconds before he was ready for it. He adjusted immediately, automatically, the adjustment so small and natural that anyone watching might have missed it. She didn't miss it. He's using my data, she thought. He's just not ready to say so. That was fine. Data was data. Lives were lives. The source of a wind call was the least relevant thing about it. She found the concealed observer on day 2. The exercise was a standard compound approach, 14 operators. Designated sectors, specific objectives. She was moving to her overwatch position along the north wall when something wrong touched the edge of her attention. Not a sound, not a movement. A shadow that wasn't behaving the way afternoon light should make a shadow behave against a concrete wall at that angle in that season. She stopped moving. Contact east, she said into her radio. Com flat. Concealed observer, adjacent structure. 40 meters, your 3 o'clock silence on the radio. Then Ellison, that structure is outside the exercise parameters. Check it, she said. Another silence, longer. She heard boots on gravel. Then a voice she didn't recognize. She's right. Training cadre observer. Out here the whole time. Mercer's voice came on 5 seconds later. Continue the exercise. Not good catch. Not well. Just continue. But the silence before he spoke was a half second longer than it needed to be. She filed that away too. Every half second of silence was data. Every unspoken thing was information. She had built her entire professional life on the conviction that what people don't say tells you more than what they do. Evan Cole sat down next to her at the rifle bench that afternoon without asking permission. She liked that. The observer, he said. How? Shadow was wrong. He thought about that. I've been running observation drills for 3 years. I didn't catch it. You were looking at the exercise, she said. Too hard. When you look at a problem too hard, you sign the problem and start seeing your version of it. He nodded slowly. Like confirmation bias with your eyes. Exactly like that. He was quiet for a moment. Then, can I ask you something? You're already asking the other guys. He paused carefully. They say you got lucky with the observer. Some of them think that Mercer doesn't. He said it with quiet certainty. He just won't say so yet. She looked at him properly for the first time. Evan Cole was young mid-20s and carried himself with the particular tension of someone who was technically exceptional and emotionally uncertain. A combination she recognized because she had spent years learning to manage the same combination in herself. What are you afraid of? She asked. The question landed directly and he didn't flinch from it, which told her something important about who he actually was beneath the uncertainty. Being the reason something fails, he said. Not through incompetence. Through freezing. At the wrong moment, because someone's watching and I start thinking about the watching instead of the work. That fear is useful, she said. He looked at her, like she'd said something in the wrong language. Most people try to eliminate fear, she said. That's the wrong goal. You can't eliminate it. And if you could, you'd eliminate the signal that tells you something genuinely matters. She picked up the bolt assembly and held it to the light. You name it instead, I'm afraid. Say it clearly in your head. Like a fact, not a weakness information. Then you ask yourself one question. What is the next single decision in front of me? Not the whole mission, not the outcome. Just the next decision. Can you make that one? Evan was quiet. Thinking. Really thinking, not performing thought. Usually, he said. Then make it. And then make the next one. She replaced the bolt. Fear doesn't have to go away for you to move through it. It just has to stop being the loudest voice in the room. He exhaled. A long, slow breath that carried something with it. Why are you telling me this? He said. Because in 4 days I've watched you be the most technically capable communications specialist on this team and simultaneously the least confident person in every room you enter, she said. That's a waste. And I don't like waste, he almost smiled. It was a careful smile, still trying to figure out if it was allowed. Neither do I, he day 4. She had figured out Logan Pike. It hadn't required particular insight. He was a man who wore his interior life on the surface while believing he was concealing it, which is the most common kind of self-deception and the most dangerous in high-pressure environments. She asked Evan about it quietly on the evening of day 3. His last deployment, she said. What happened? Evan looked at her. You read it in him? I read it in the bravado, she said. Real confidence doesn't perform, it just operates. A pause. Then, 3 months ago. Different unit. Logan was on overwatch. He had the shot hostile approaching one of their guys. Clear line, clean angle. He held 2 seconds, maybe less. The hostile got to cover. The operator on the ground took a hit. Evan stopped. He made it. But Logan has been paying for those 2 seconds ever since. She understood immediately. Not the guilt itself. Everyone in this work understood delayed guilt. That specific calculus of a moment that never resolves, but what Logan had done with the guilt. He had converted it into a wall, a loud, aggressive, constantly performing wall of certainty designed to ensure that no one ever again witnessed him hesitate. And she was the most threatening thing he had encountered in 3 months. Not because she was intimidating, because she was quiet, because she observed. Because quiet observers saw the things that walls were built to hide. She didn't tell Evan what she was thinking. She just cleaned Graybird and let the understanding settle. The intelligence update came at 400 on day 5. Mercer assembled them in the briefing hut. The lights were low. His face was controlled in the specific way that experienced commanders control their faces when the situation has just gotten significantly worse, and they need the room to stay level while they process it. Timelines moved up. He didn't soften it. 72 hours. The captors are moving the hostages toward the demolition zone ahead of schedule. We believe they've detected increased satellite coverage, and they're reacting silence. 12 engineers, someone said. 12 engineers and Officer Kane, Mercer said, who has been untreated for 9 days with a gunshot wound to the left leg. A pause. If they reach the demolition zone before we have our relay solution. He let the room finish the sentence. Every head turned toward Mara, not quickly, not obviously. But she felt it, the slow, reluctant rotation of 11 pairs of eyes performing a recalculation they hadn't expected to make. Mercer looked at the terrain model. He looked at the relay position. She watched his face do the thing she had seen it do once, before the private argument. The conclusion he'd reached that he didn't want to reach. He looked at her. Current generation systems, he said. Can make the distance, she said. Can't guarantee the load consistency at range in that corridor, and your system can. The silence in the room was physical. She felt it pressing on everyone simultaneously. felt the weight of 11 operational minds, revising assessments they had locked in days ago and were only now being forced to unlock. Logan's voice came from the back, quieter than usual. Not loud, not certain, just "You're going to stake 13 lives on one shot, and on the judgment to take it at the right moment," she said. "And on the communication support to create the window. And on your team to move the second the relay is down." She looked at him directly. "One shot is never just one shot, it's everything that built toward it." Logan said nothing. Mercer looked at the map. "I want to see the shot." Tomorrow, 600. The demonstration range was set at first light. Mercer had set it up himself, she could tell by the precision of the target placement. The wind flags positioned to test specific variables, the absence of any margin for error or interpretation. If this was a test, he intended it to be conclusive. The target was a 1-inch steel bracket at full operational distance. The wind that morning ran in two directions, a primary desert crosswind from the southwest, irregular in its intervals, and a smaller thermal current lifting off the valley floor from the south that complicated every calculation by adding a vertical component to a problem that was already laterally complex. She lay behind Graybird for 12 minutes before she fired. Nobody spoke. She heard Logan shift his weight twice. She heard Evan breathing steadily beside her, running the wind data on his instrument, feeding her numbers in a low, quiet voice that she absorbed and filtered through everything she was reading with her own eyes, the flagging tape. A dust eddy near the berm, the behavior of a hawk crossing the range at altitude, the thermal shimmer that told her the valley current was building to a peak. "Wait," she told herself. "Don't fight it, read it, wait." Caleb's voice, always Caleb's voice in these moments. A sniper who fights the wind loses. A sniper who reads the wind. A sniper who understands the wind predicts it. The window came. 3.5 seconds. She fired once. The bracket rang like a struck bell, spun off the stand and landed 12 feet downrange. The silence that followed was the first completely honest silence she had experienced since walking into that briefing hut. Not the silence of judgment, not the silence of men deciding. The silence of men whose decisions had been unmade for them by evidence they couldn't argue with. Mercer walked downrange himself. He stood over the bracket. He stood there for 4 full seconds, she counted. Then he walked back without a word, without looking at anyone. And she understood that 4 seconds was how long it took Grant Mercer to have a private reckoning with a conclusion he had been wrong about. Logan was standing at the firing line when she stood up. She didn't look at him. She started breaking down her position. She heard him exhale through his nose, a small, barely audible sound. The sound of a very specific kind of pride giving way to something more accurate. She let it pass without acknowledgement. Caleb's voice. "The shot speaks for itself. The second you explain it. You've made it smaller." The second intelligence report came 36 hours before Wheels Up. It came as a single encrypted line, decoded and read aloud by Evan in a voice stripped entirely of inflection, because that was the only way to deliver it without letting the room hear how badly it changed things. The demolition system had a secondary relay. Not in the satellite imagery. Not in the structural analysis, not in any model, any assessment, any contingency plan built over the previous week. A secondary relay. Position unknown. The room went completely still in the way rooms go still when a plan that everyone has committed to intellectually and emotionally discovers a fault line running through its foundation. Mercer looked at Mara. His expression was not accusing. It was the expression of a man looking at the only person in the room who might have information he needed and hoping, for the first time without any armor around the hope, that she did. "Tell me you have something," he said. "I have something," she said. Everyone turned. "I wasn't planning to shoot the relay housing," she said. "I was always planning to shoot the mounting bracket." Silence. Direct strike on the housing. The system is designed for it. It has redundancies, fail-safes. The architecture is built to absorb a targeted hit. She stood up. But the bracket is structural. Destroy the bracket, the entire assembly shears under its own weight. The relay falls. A falling relay can't transmit a signal. It can't trigger anything. Primary or secondary, she looked at Mercer, and a falling relay with a bullet-cut bracket creates sparks. Metal debris, sudden movement and light, a distraction. The silence stretched. "You planned for a secondary relay," Mercer said slowly. "I planned for the possibility of complications I couldn't anticipate," she said. "Because there are always complications I can't anticipate. A system with a single point of failure isn't a system. It's a wish." Nobody spoke. Logan was leaning against the far wall with his arms crossed. And she saw something move across his face, not the aggressive certainty he'd carried since day one, but something rawer and more honest than that. Something that looked like recognition. The recognition of a person who had built an entire internal architecture around never being caught underprepared, looking at someone who had done the same thing quietly and without announcement. He unfolded his arms. He said nothing, but he unfolded his arms. Mercer looked at the map for a long time. When he looked up, something had shifted in him, too small and structural, like a wall that hadn't come down but had acquired, for the first time, a door. Wheels up in 42 hours, he said. That night, she cleaned Graybird alone. She thought about the canyon, the wind corridor, the 3.5-second window. She thought about Caleb, his hands on this rifle, his voice in her memory, his note under the barrel. She's not for looking at. She's for when it has to count. She thought about Evan and his fear, and the way naming a fear out loud, even silently, even privately, was the first act of moving through it rather than away from it. She thought about Logan carrying 2 seconds of hesitation like a stone he couldn't put down, and the particular prison of trying to outrun the one moment you can't revise. She thought about Mercer, who was not a bad man, she had decided, a rigid man, a man whose experience had calcified into certainty without his noticing, the way the most dangerous assumptions always arrive, slowly, quietly, wearing the face of wisdom. She thought about 13 people inside a mountain in Karif, 12 engineers, 1 wounded officer, each of them someone's person. Each of them inside a building where the difference between returning home and not returning home was a rifle, a window, and a woman that nobody in that briefing hut had wanted to trust. She closed the case. She lay back on her cot, the Nevada desert pressed against the walls of the hut, vast and indifferent and full of information. If you knew how to read it. Read everything, Caleb used to say. Assume nothing, wait for the window. She was still waiting. But for the first time since she'd driven through that gate, she wasn't waiting alone. The 42 hours before Wheels Up did not pass gently. Mercer didn't ease up. If anything, he pushed harder, not with the reflexive dismissal of the first days, but with the precise, deliberate pressure of a man who had revised his opinion of someone's capability and was now stress testing that revision the way you stress test a weld before you trust your life to it. There was a difference between the two kinds of pressure, and Mara felt it. The first kind was designed to send her away. The second kind was designed to find out if she would break on the way to Karif. She didn't break, but she came closer than she showed anyone. The night before departure, at 2,300, Mercer called a final rehearsal. Full kit, full communication load, simulated infiltration sequence in the dark, across terrain that had been reconfigured to approximate the approach to the Karif station as closely as the Nevada desert allowed. Every operator in position, every contingency rehearsed, every timing sequence run twice, then 3 times, till it lived in muscle memory rather than conscious thought. Mara ran it with them, not as an observer, as part of the unit. That was the first thing the team noticed, though nobody said it out loud. She didn't stand back and watch the operators train while she prepared her shooting position. She moved with them, learned their pace, learned the specific way each man communicated under stress, the words Logan chose when he was certain, the silence Evan kept when he was processing, the particular economy of movement that Mercer used when he wanted someone to understand something without having to explain it twice. At 130, the rehearsal hit its first real problem. The simulated assault entry timing was off by 11 seconds. Not catastrophically, but in an operation where the relay shot had to occur within a window of 3 to 4 seconds, and the assault team's entry had to follow within 5 seconds of the relay falling. 11 seconds was a canyon between success and catastrophe. Run it again, Mercer said. They ran it again, still 8 seconds off. Mercer stood in the dark and said nothing for a long moment. Then somebody tell me why. Nobody answered immediately. Logan was rechecking his approach route. 2 operators were looking at their timing sequences. Everyone was looking at the problem through the lens of their own position, which was the correct instinct and exactly the wrong approach. Mara said, "It's the communication handoff between Evan's network interrupt and your entry signal. There's a gap. Silence. Evan kills the backup network," she said. "Then he has to confirm the kill to you before you move. That confirmation step takes 8 to 11 seconds, and it doesn't need to exist. If the lights in the compound die, your entry signal is the lights dying. You don't wait for the radio confirmation." Mercer looked at her. Then at Evan. "She's right," Evan said. He said it without hesitation, without hedging, with the clean certainty of a man who had just seen the solution to a problem he'd been staring at for too long. "I've been thinking of the confirmation as a safety check. It's actually a bottleneck. If the network goes down, the visual is your signal. I can keep the radio line open as backup." "That's a significant change to the sequence," Logan said. "It's a correction," Mara said. Logan looked at her across the dark, not the hostile, challenging look of the first days. Something more complicated than that. The look of a man who is angry and right at the same time and doesn't know what to do with either condition. "Run it again," Mercer said. With the change, they ran it again. 6 seconds off again, 4 seconds again, 2.5. At 2:45 in the morning in the Nevada dark, Task Unit Trident ran a simulated infiltration sequence for the seventh time and hit the relay window with 1.8 seconds to spare. Not comfortable, not generous, but real. Real enough to stake a life on, which was what they were going to do, Mercer called it. Get some sleep, he said. Wheels up at 500, nobody moved immediately. 14 operators standing in the dark, all of them carrying the specific weight of a mission that had just become undeniable. The weight of knowing that in approximately 36 hours, the rehearsal would be the reality. And the difference between the two was that in the reality, there were no second chances and no one was going home if it went wrong. Logan was the first to move. He passed Mara on his way to the equipment shed, close enough that she could hear him breathe. He didn't stop, didn't look at her. But as he passed, he said very quietly, barely loud enough to exist, "Good catch on the timing." He kept walking. She let it pass without responding. But something shifted in the space between them. Barely perceptible. The width of 2.5 seconds. They were wheels up before dawn. The flight was long and divided, routed through 2 intermediate stops that were on no public manifest. Staffed by people whose names were not on any document she had access to. The team flew in 2 separate aircraft, reunited at a forward operating base so classified that Mara's clearance had been upgraded specifically to include it 48 hours earlier, a detail that told her more about how seriously the mission was being taken at the command level than any briefing had. At the FOB, they received the final intelligence package. Officer Kane's condition had deteriorated. The leg wound had developed infection, not confirmed sepsis yet, but trending toward it with the predictability of all untreated wounds in unsanitary environments. He had 9, maybe 11 days before the infection became a terminal event. The timeline they had been given, 72 hours, was already 30 hours old. They had 42 hours at the outside, before Thomas Kane ran out of them. Mercer briefed it straight, without cushioning. We are not early. We are not comfortable. We are on time, and on time is what we have. He looked around the room. Questions. It wasn't an invitation for doubt, it was an invitation for information. The distinction was everything in rooms like that one. Evan raised his hand, not hesitantly, cleanly, with purpose. The backup network at the station. I've been looking at the architecture from the satellite intel, and there's a second router node on the eastern exterior wall that isn't in the primary schematic. I want to confirm whether it's active or redundant before I commit to the interrupt sequence. How long to confirm? 90 minutes with the gear I have here. You have 60, Mercer said, because we're moving at 200 regardless. He paused. What do you need? Evan told him. Mercer got it for him. The exchange took 40 seconds and had none of the friction that would have attended the same exchange a week earlier, when Evan's visibility in the room was limited to the moments when his laptop produced something someone else needed. The 60 minutes became the most important 60 minutes of the operation, though nobody knew it yet. Because what Evan found in that second router node wasn't a redundant system. It was the answer to the question that had been at the center of the mission since the second intelligence report. He found the secondary relay signal path. He came to Mara first, not Mercer. Later, when she thought about it, she understood why. Not because he was trying to exclude the chain of command. Because he needed to be certain before he said it out loud to the room, and she was the person whose judgment he trusted to tell him whether he was certain. He set his laptop in front of her and pointed. She looked at it for 30 seconds. Go to Mercer, she said. I'm right? Go to Mercer, she said again. Right now, he went. The briefing room went through 3 distinct phases in the 4 minutes after Evan presented his finding. The first phase was the silence of comprehension, the silence of 11 men understanding simultaneously what they were looking at and what it meant. The second phase was Logan. If the secondary signal path runs through the eastern router node, he said, then killing the primary relay isn't enough. You need the router down first. Or simultaneously, or the bracket shot takes both, Mara said. The physical connection between the mounting assembly and the station's exterior wall is severed. It severs the hardwired signal path through the wall, including the eastern node's connection to the relay system. Every head turned toward her. The bracket isn't just structural, she said. It's the junction point. It's where the hardwire runs through the wall into the relay housing. Cut the bracket, you cut the hardwire. Cut the hardwire, you isolate both relays from the demolition trigger simultaneously. She paused. And then Evan kills the router node, which takes out the wireless backup. Silence. One shot, Evan said quietly. Same plan, she said. Same shot. We were always going to cut the bracket. We just didn't know it was doing 2 jobs. The third phase was Mercer. He sat down, which she had not seen him do in a briefing since she arrived. He sat down and put both hands flat on the table and looked at the laptop screen, and then looked at Mara, and then looked at the ceiling. And she understood that Grant Mercer was doing the thing that was hardest for men like him to do. He was revising. Comprehensively. With all of it, his assessment of the mission, his assessment of her plan, and his assessment of himself, and what his early certainty had cost them in the days before he finally started listening. "This changes nothing about the execution," he said finally. "And everything about the stakes." He stood up. "Ellison, you are certain about the bracket?" It was not a question. It was something more serious than a question. It was the acknowledgement that she was the person whose certainty mattered now, and that he was choosing to stake the mission on it. "I'm certain," she said. He nodded, one clean, deliberate nod. "Cole, you are certain about the router interrupt?" Evan didn't hesitate. "Certain." Mercer looked at Logan. Logan was looking at Mara. Not with hostility, not with doubt, with something she recognized slowly, because she had not expected to see it on his face. Something that looked like not quite respect, not yet, not fully, but the immediate predecessor of respect. The moment just before a person stops fighting what the evidence is telling them and lets it land. "Pike," Mercer said. Logan looked at Mercer. "You're on rescue. Kane is your primary responsibility when we breach." Logan straightened slightly. "Understood. That means you keep yourself alive and mobile through the entire approach. Because if you go down before the breach, Kane goes down with you." Mercer held his gaze. "Clear?" "Clear," Logan said. And something in the way he said it was different from every other affirmation he had given in the week Mara had known him. Less performance, more truth. Like a man setting down a very heavy thing he had been carrying for too long and finally, quietly, deciding to move without it. They departed at 200 and moved into Karif under a sky that offered no moon and no mercy. Mara and Evan moved separately from the assault element, climbing toward the shepherd's shelter above the communications station, while Mercer, Logan, and the rest of Trident approached through the dry riverbed below. The insertion had been rehearsed until it lived in the body rather than the mind, and it moved the way rehearsed things move in the dark, not smoothly, but with a practiced tolerance for friction, a trained ability to absorb the small wrong turns that always exist between the plan and the reality. The climb was harder than the models had suggested. The terrain was looser, the gradient steeper, and the cold at elevation hit with the specific efficiency of mountain cold. The kind that finds every gap in your gear and keeps pressure there. She moved without speaking, without using her light, reading the ground through her feet and the faint starlight, and 11 years of operating in terrain that didn't care whether you succeeded. Evan moved well. Better than she'd expect, not easily, not without effort, but with the focused economy of motion that comes from having made a private decision somewhere between the FOB and the hillside, that whatever happened next, he was going to be equal to it. She had told him name the fear, then make the next decision. He was making decisions. She could feel it in the way he moved. At the shelter, she set up Greybird and settled into position below. The communication station was lit against the mountain, dark, not brightly, but enough. She could see the relay mounting bracket from here. 43 inches of exposed steel at a distance that would have been professionally inadvisable and situationally unavoidable. She checked her ballistic tables. Caleb's handwriting. The numbers he had worked out over 18 months of testing. Refined over years of field application, written in the careful hand of a man who understood that the difference between a note taken carelessly and a note taken precisely might someday be the difference between someone coming home. "Primary optic check," she said quietly to Evan. He gave her the confirmation. She settled in and then she waited. Waiting was its own discipline. Most people thought of a sniper's job as the shot. The shot was 30% of it at most. The other 70 was this, the waiting, the watching, the reading of every variable without letting any one variable dominate the picture. The disciplined management of attention across a field that was always changing and never announced its changes in advance. She watched the compound. She watched the wind flags, 3 of them, at different elevations that she and Evan had identified in the satellite imagery and confirmed from this position. She watched the dust behavior in the canyon below, which was not a flag or an instrument but was information nonetheless, the most honest information she had, because it had no stake in the outcome. Evan fed her weather data in a low-level voice, steady, focused, not performing steadiness, actually steady, which was a different thing entirely, and the only version that mattered. 12 minutes in, Mercer's voice came through on the tactical channel. "Assault element is in position, holding at the riverbed. Confirming your status. Overwatch is set," Mara said. "Wind is variable. I'm reading the corridor. Give me the word when you're ready to initiate." A pause. Then standing by, she kept watching, and then 2 things happened. In the wrong order, at the wrong time, in the specific way that operations always go wrong, not catastrophically, not all at once, but in a sequence of small miscalculations that each seem manageable until they aren't. The first thing, the surveillance drone. It wasn't on the mission intelligence. It wasn't in any of the pre-operation imagery. It appeared from the east at low altitude, moving in a slow arc that was not random. It was a search pattern. And the search pattern was centered on the riverbed, where Mercer's assault element was lying flat in the dark, trying to be invisible. Drone, someone said on the tactical channel, one word. Clean, no panic, because SEALs don't panic on the radio. They just state facts with the same tone they'd use to report the weather. Hold, Mercer said. Everyone hold. The drone passed over the riverbed at 60 feet. Didn't stop. Continued its arc and moved north 30 seconds. It's going to come back, Evan said quietly beside her. He was watching it on his instrument feed arc pattern, 90-second cycle. It's going to make a second pass directly over their position in a pause 80 seconds. Mercer, Mara said. The drone is coming back. 80 seconds to second pass, a brief silence. Then options, move the element south along the riverbed, 15 meters. The drone's camera angle can't cover the south face of the berm at the altitude it's running. 15 meters buys you the pass, a longer silence. She was asking him to move 14 operators in 80 seconds in the dark across loose terrain without making noise. She knew what that was. She asked it anyway. Because the alternative was the drone detecting the element, triggering an alert, and collapsing the entire operation before the relay was touched. Move, Mercer said. She heard nothing on the channel for 74 seconds. Just the low static of an open line, which in its own way was the most intense sound she had ever listened to. The drone made its second pass. The channel stayed quiet. Then element is clear, resuming position. She exhaled through her nose. Slowly, one controlled exhale. Good, she said. Then the second thing happened. A sound, small mechanical, coming from directly to her left, 2 inches from the scope. She didn't move. She assessed. The wind, the real wind. The mountain wind that had no interest in the timeline of any human operation had shifted at elevation. It caught the primary optic mount at an angle it wasn't designed for. A component she had checked and rechecked in Nevada, that had been solid through the entire climb, had developed a micro-fracture somewhere in the hardware under the cold and the vibration of the ascent. She looked through the scope. The image was wrong. Not catastrophically wrong, the optic was still attached, still functional. But there was a tilt, a 3-degree misalignment that at this distance translated to a miss of approximately 14 inches. 14 inches at the bracket. She pulled away from the scope. She did not make a sound. She did not let anything she was feeling move into her body language, because Evan was beside her, and Evan was steady right now, and Evan needed to stay steady. She went to the backup site. Graybird had a backup site because Caleb had built her for the worst case, not the expected case. Not optical, a precise, carefully calibrated iron sight that traded the magnification and light gathering of the primary scope for a direct, unmediated line between shooter and target. At this distance, with this load in this wind corridor, an iron sight was not the plan anyone would have chosen. It was the plan she had now, Evan, she said quietly. Primary optic is compromised. I'm going to the backup, a beat of silence. She heard him process it, the intake of information, the reassessment, the decision not to react emotionally to something that required a technical response. Ballistic adjustment, he asked, working it. She was already at the tables. Caleb's handwriting. The numbers for the backup configuration, different hold points, different wind compensation values, the entire calculation reshaped by the loss of 40% of her sight picture. She ran the numbers. She ran them again. She ran them a third time. Not because she didn't trust her arithmetic, but because at this distance, in this wind, with this sight, one error in the calculation was the difference between the bracket and a near miss. And a near miss was 13 people who didn't come home. Mercer, she said on the tactical channel. I need 60 seconds. We have a problem at the entry point. Mercer came back immediately. One of the guards has moved off pattern. He's stationary at the east approach. We cannot initiate until he moves or is addressed. 60 seconds had just become indefinite. Copy, she said. She looked through the iron sight. She looked at the bracket. She found it. Clean, centered. Exactly where it needed to be. And then in the thermal shimmer below her position, she watched one of the compound guards stop walking and turn and look directly not toward the assault element, not toward the drone's last position, but up at the hillside. At the shepherd shelter. He hadn't seen them. She knew that. He was looking in the right direction by accident, which was sometimes more dangerous than looking by intention, because it meant his positioning was unpredictable. Evan, she said. I see him, Evan said. He hadn't moved. Don't move anything, she said. Don't adjust. Don't shift your weight. Stay exactly where you are. The guard looked at the hillside for 7 seconds. In 7 seconds you can think the following thing simultaneously. I should have checked the mount hardware at altitude. I should have checked it twice. Caleb would have checked it twice. I'm going to check everything twice for the rest of my life if there is a rest of my life after this. The ballistic adjustment for the iron sight at this distance in a split current with a 15-degree temperature differential and a subsonic load is not a number I want to be running in my head while a guard is potentially looking at me. Evan is doing well, he hasn't moved, he is doing exactly what I told him. If this goes wrong, it will not be because of Evan. 7 seconds, the guard looked away, he walked south. He resumed his pattern. A long, slow breath. I named it, he whispered. She looked at him, the fear, he said. I named it, like you said, a pause, it worked. She turned back to the site. Good, she said. Now make the next decision. What's the next decision? Tell me the wind. Right now, everything you have, he told her. She listened. She looked at the flags, she looked at the dust. She looked at the thermal behavior in the canyon, and the way the cold air was pressing down against the warmer current and the specific pattern it created at the bracket's elevation when both currents were moving simultaneously. And she understood that the window she had been planning for 3.5 seconds was not going to come. The wind tonight was wrong, specifically precisely wrong. The two opposing currents were running at intervals that didn't produce a 3.5-second overlap of relative stability. They produced short, chaotic bursts of between 1 and 2 seconds, separated by periods of severe combined cross 1 to 2 seconds to take an iron sight shot at this distance, with this load, with a backup ballistic calculation, in a split current corridor, with the entire operation waiting on the other end of it. She didn't tell Mercer, not yet, not until she'd solved it. Because the problem wasn't unsolvable. It was just different from the problem she'd planned for. She went back to Caleb's tables. She looked for the 1-second hold configuration, the data he'd built for emergency 0. For the worst case he'd imagined when he designed her. It was there. Of course it was there. She's not for looking at, he'd said. She's for when it has to count, on the tactical channel. Mercer's voice came through with a quality she hadn't heard from him before. Ellison. A pause. The guard at the east approach has moved back toward the compound. We have our entry window. What is your status? Everyone on the channel would hear what she said next. Every operator in the riverbed. Every commander monitoring from the fob. The chain of command, the mission record, the operational archive. She could say, I need more time, and lose the entry window. She could say, ready to fire, and commit to a shot she had not fully solved yet. She said, give me 90 seconds. Ellison, 90 seconds, she said. I have the solution. I need 90 seconds to confirm it. A silence on the channel. The operational silence of a man making a decision in the dark about whether to trust someone he had not trusted 3 days ago. Then Mercer said, you have 90 seconds, clock starts now. She went back to the tables. She ran the 1-second configuration numbers. She cross-referenced with the current wind readings. She made 2 corrections to the hold point. She made 1 correction to the elevation. She confirmed the round in the chamber. She looked through the iron sight. The bracket was there. 43 inches of steel in the dark at a distance that still made her throat tight if she thought about it as a number rather than as a geometry problem. She stopped thinking about it as a number. She looked at the canyon. She watched the currents. She watched the pattern of 1-second intervals and identified the specific signature, the particular behavior of the flags and the dust at the moment just before the currents hit their brief alignment. She could predict it, not perfectly, but accurately enough. A sniper who understands the wind predicts it 70 seconds, Evan said quietly. She watched. Down below in the compound, a light moved. An interior light visible through a window, someone walking through the station with a lamp or a flashlight, moving toward the east corridor. Moving toward the hostages. Moving them. The hostages are being relocated, someone said on the channel. Not Mercer, one of the operators in the riverbed who had a sight line on the station interior. I can see movement. They're moving them now. The timeline had just compressed from 90 seconds to immediate. Ellison, Mercer said. His voice had changed. The operational control was still there, but beneath it was something human and urgent. The voice of a man who had revised his assessment of another person and was now, in the most serious possible way, betting on the revised version. Talk to me. She watched the flags. She watched the dust. She watched the canyon. She breathed in. She breathed out. And the currents moved into alignment, not 3.5 seconds. Not 2 seconds, 1.4 seconds. She fired. The report of the shot was almost nothing in the mountain dark. The subsonic load made it barely a whisper, a sound you could mistake for a stone shifted by the wind. But the result was not nothing. The bracket sang a sharp, ringing, metallic cry that traveled across the canyon before the relay assembly sheared at the mounting point and fell. Sparks. A shower of metal fragments, bright in the scattering against the exterior wall of the compound. The guard at the east approach spun toward the sparks. In the riverbed, the assault element moved. Relay is down, Evan said. His voice was level, clean. He was already moving. Interrupting the router node now, the compound lights died. Not flickered, died clean, complete, total. On the tactical channel, 14 operators who had spent a week deciding whether to trust Mara Ellison said absolutely nothing at all. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then Mercer's voice came through the dark, with the particular gravity of a man who knows he is speaking something that will be remembered. Relay is down, hostages are alive, Trident move. Logan Pike was the first one through the compound wall. He didn't hesitate. Logan Pike went through the compound wall first, and he didn't hesitate. That was the thing Mara noticed from her position above, not through the iron sight, because the shot was done and Greybird was already being secured, but through the ambient awareness of a person who had spent the last 72 hours learning exactly how this team moved and breathed and made decisions under pressure. She knew Logan's rhythm by now. She knew the half-beat he used to take before committing to movement, the almost imperceptible gathering of himself that preceded every action, the ghost of 2 seconds of hesitation that had been haunting him for 3 months. It wasn't there anymore. He went through the wall like a man who had put something down and decided to move without it, and the 4 operators behind him matched his pace exactly. The way a team matches pace when the person in front of them is moving with genuine certainty rather than performed certainty, which are 2 entirely different things, and every experienced operator knows the difference in their bones. Evan, Mara said. Router node status, down and staying down, Evan said. He was still at his equipment, both hands working, his voice carrying the focused calm of someone who has named their fear and moved through it, and is now on the other side of it, operating in the clean space that opens up when you stop fighting yourself. Wireless backup is isolated. The relay has no signal. Primary or secondary. Confirm no signal to the demolition trigger. Confirm. The trigger is dead. A pause. It's done, Mara. She heard what was underneath those 3 words. Not relief, not yet, because there were still 14 operators moving through a hostile compound in the dark, and the operation was not finished. But something adjacent to relief. The particular satisfaction of a person who had been told implicitly and explicitly that they were the weak link, who had been handed a role that seemed secondary, and performed it so precisely that the entire operation's survival depended on it. She didn't say good job or well done. She said stay on it until every one of them is out. Copy, She heard him smile briefly in the dark. Below, in the compound, the tactical channel had gone to clipped operational language, the compressed, efficient communication of people working in the dark with their hands and their training, and the specific kind of focus that exists only when everything is real and nothing can be taken back. East corridor clear. 2 tangos down, west approach, holding at the interior stairwell, contact, waiting on contact, neutralized, move. She listened to the channel the way she had learned to listen to wind, not for any single element, but for the whole pattern, the shape of it, what it was telling her about what she couldn't see directly. The channel sounded like a team that was moving well, moving together, moving with the coherence of people who had rehearsed something until it was in the body and not just the mind. And then Logan's voice, flatter than everything else, stripped of everything except the essential. I have Kane. He's breathing, he needs to move now. Thomas Kane had survived 9 days on the strength of something that medical science could quantify in terms of infection rates and pain tolerance and the body's capacity to compensate for inadequate treatment, but that the people who extracted him would later describe in simpler terms. He had decided not to die. That was it. That was the entire explanation that Logan gave. Afterward, to anyone who asked what condition the officer was in when they found him, he'd decided not to die, Logan said. You could see it in him. He was in bad shape. But he'd made a choice and he was keeping it. When Logan came through the interior door and found Kane in the corner of the room, leg wrapped in a field dressing that had been improvised from a shirt 3 days ago, hands free because the captors had stopped bothering to restrain someone they'd decided wasn't going anywhere, Kane looked up at him and said, with the particular directness of a man who has spent 9 days conserving energy for the things that matter, "Took you long enough." Logan almost laughed. He didn't. He crouched down, assessed the leg, and said, "Can you move with support?" "I can move with or without support," Kane said. "I've been moving in my head for 9 days. My legs just need to catch up." "We're going to help them catch up," Logan said. He got an arm under Kane's shoulder. "On 3 on 2, Kane said." Logan looked at him. Kane looked back, 54 years old. Gunshot wound, 9 days without proper treatment, and the absolute unshakable quality of a man who has been in difficult rooms his entire career and has never once let the room decide who he was. On 2, Logan said. They moved. The engineers were in 2 separate rooms on the 2nd level, which the intelligence had not confirmed, and the assault team had to adapt to in real time, splitting the extraction into 2 simultaneous movements with half the operators, coordinating through the tactical channel with the specific economy of language that Mercer had spent 20 years developing in himself and his teams. Mercer was on the second floor when the problem arrived. It arrived in the form of a guard who should not have been there, not according to the patrol pattern, not according to the surveillance data, not according to any model or any contingency plan. A guard who had apparently been asleep in a room adjacent to where the engineers were being held, and who woke up at the worst possible moment, alerted by some combination of sound and instinct and the specific animal awareness that humans retain in dangerous environments even when their conscious minds are asleep. He came out of the room with a weapon and he saw Mercer at the same instant. Mercer saw him. The next 2 seconds were the kind that get written up in after-action reports with clinical language that strips away everything human about them. Contact engaged. Threat neutralized. Element continued. Because clinical language is how you describe things that happen too fast and too close for there to be any other honest account of them. Mercer engaged. The guard went down. The door at the end of the corridor opened immediately after 2 more guards, alerted by the sound, moving fast and without hesitation. Contact second floor east corridor, Mercer said on the channel. His voice was exactly level. 2 tangos moving to intercept. I need. 3 of his operators were already moving toward him before he finished the sentence. The corridor fight lasted 11 seconds. It felt much longer to everyone in it. Because time does that, it expands in the moments when the outcome is genuinely uncertain, when the margin between the version of events where everyone walks out and the version where they don't is the width of a single division, made correctly or incorrectly at a speed that doesn't allow for reflection. When it was over, Mercer's element had the east corridor and all 12 engineers were moving. But one of his operators, a quiet, steady man named Reyes, who had said almost nothing to Mara in the entire week of training but had watched everything with the careful attention of someone who was always learning, had taken a hit. Left shoulder. Not fatal, but enough that he couldn't carry his own weight on the descent. Reyes is down, someone said on the channel. How bad? Mercer said. Mobile with support. He's mobile. Then he moves, Mercer said. Everyone moves. We are not stopping. From the shepherd's shelter, Mara heard all of it. She heard the contact report. She heard the 11 seconds of silence on the channel that was not actually silence, but was the channel being used for something that left no room for words. She heard Reyes's status report and Mercer's response and the resumption of movement in the compound below. She had Greybird secured and her position partially broken down, because the shot was done and the operation's next phase was the extraction, and her role in the extraction was to be ready to cover the descent if anything came at the team from outside the compound. What came from outside the compound came from the north. She heard it before she saw it, the sound of a vehicle moving on the mountain road above the compound, without lights, which meant it had been moving without lights for some time, and whoever was driving it knew exactly where they were going. Evan, she said. I hear it, he said. Get on the channel. Now, he was already keying. Mercer, we have a vehicle on the North Mountain Road. No lights. Moving toward the compound, ETA to the compound perimeter, approximately 4 minutes. A brief pause. Then Mercer, how many? Evan looked at Mara. Mara listened to the engine. She had spent enough time around military vehicles to hear the difference between a light transport and something heavier. This was heavier. Unknown number, Evan said. Vehicle is heavy. Could be a reinforcement unit. 4 minutes, Mercer said. It wasn't a question. It was a man reorganizing the time he had available and the things he needed to do inside it. Everyone accelerates. We are out of this compound in 3 minutes. Move. The channel erupted with compressed confirmations and Mara heard the tempo of the operation below her change, not into panic, which was the wrong word for what happened to well-trained teams under time pressure, but into a higher register of focus, a stripping away of everything except the essential, the way a fire burns hotter when the oxygen creased. Mara, Evan said quietly. He was using her first name, which he had never done before in an operational context, and she understood that it meant something, that whatever he was about to say was something he was saying as himself, not as a communications specialist running a channel. The North Road. If the vehicle gets to the compound before the team is clear, it won't, she said. But if it does, Evan, she looked at him, make the next decision. What's the next decision in front of you? He held her gaze for 1 second. Then keep the router node down until the last operator is clear. That's it, she said. Do that. He went back to his equipment. She went back to watching the North Road. 3 minutes and 20 seconds. That was how long it took Task Unit Trident to extract 12 engineers and 1 CIA officer from a fortified mountain communication station in Karif, with 1 operator wounded, 2 hostage rooms instead of the anticipated 1, unscheduled guard contact on the 2nd floor, and a reinforcement vehicle 4 minutes out. 3 minutes and 20 seconds. It was, and this would be confirmed in the mission review, months later, the fastest successful extraction of a comparable hostage group in naval special warfare operational history for that theater. Mercer got the last engineer through the compound wall with 40 seconds to spare before the vehicle reached the perimeter. Mara saw the headlights come on. As the vehicle approached, they turned the lights on, when they were close enough to need them for the final approach, which told her the driver was experienced, cautious, and not yet alarmed. They didn't know anything had happened. They were arriving on schedule for a shift rotation or a supply run or something equally routine, and they were going to find a compound in total darkness with a fallen relay assembly and 11 years of carefully maintained operational security in ruins. But they were not going to find 14 Americans and 12 engineers, because those people were already moving down the mountain. She watched the vehicle reach the compound gate. She watched the gate stay closed. She watched the vehicle sit there for 30 seconds. Then a light went on inside the compound, emergency leading battery powered, which meant someone inside who hadn't been neutralized was waking up the backup systems. "Evan," she said. "I see it," he said. "They're going to find the relay within the next 2 minutes. Will they have enough time to reconstruct a signal path?" "Not with what I did to the router," he said. There was a quiet certainty in his voice that hadn't been there a week ago. "I didn't just interrupt it, I burned the configuration. They'd need 2 hours and a technician who knew what they were looking at just to understand what happened, let alone fix it." "Then we move," she said. She secured Graybird. She and Evan started down the mountain. The descent was where it almost came apart. Not because of the vehicle, not because of the compound, because of the terrain, which had no interest in anyone's timeline and had been quietly accumulating ice in the upper third of the slope during the hours they'd been stationary, and which expressed this fact to Mara at approximately the 1/3 descent point by removing her footing without warning on a section of path that had felt solid on the way up. She went down hard. Left side. Graybird's case took the impact she had turned into the fall instinctively, protecting the rifle without consciously deciding to, and she rolled 2 meters before a rock outcropping stopped her. For 1 second she assessed damage. Ribs she thought from the quality of the pain, left hand, which had caught the rock. Nothing broken in the hand. She was almost certain, the ribs she wasn't certain about. She got up. "Are you?" Evan started moving, she said. "Mara, moving, Evan." She picked up Graybird. "Stay close. Watch the ice, it starts here and runs to the lower path junction. Use the rock face on your right." She kept moving. Every breath reminded her of the ribs. She filed the information away in the same place she filed all information that couldn't be acted on immediately, not ignored. Not suppressed, just stored, because the descent required her full attention, and the ribs would require attention later. And later was a problem that only existed if she got through the next 20 minutes. On the tactical channel, Mercer's element was at the bottom of the riverbed approach and moving to the extraction vehicles. The engineers were accounted for. Kane was stable. Reyes was mobile. The timeline was holding. Over what? "What is your position?" Mercer said. "Upper descent," she said. "Moving." A pause. "ET extraction point, 18 minutes. Another pause. Longer than it needed to be, which told her something. "Copy," Mercer said. She understood the length of the pause. 18 minutes was not comfortable. The extraction vehicles had a window that was not unlimited. They were operating on a coordinated timeline with assets she didn't have direct visibility into. Assets whose patience for scheduled deviations was finite. She moved faster. The ribs registered their objection to this decision in terms that were difficult to ignore. She ignored them anyway. Logan was at the bottom of the mountain. She didn't know that until she was halfway down, when his voice came through on the channel, not to Mercer, directly to her, Ellison. "What's your actual status?" She recognized the question immediately. Not "are you okay?" which was a social question. Not "what is your ETA?" which was an operational question. What is your actual status? The question of a person who had been listening to her transmissions and had noticed something in the way she was communicating that told him the operational answer and the honest answer were not the same. "Moving under my own power," she said. "That's not what I asked." A brief silence on her end. She was navigating the ice section, which required all of her attention and some of her breath, and the ribs were making both of those things more expensive than they should have been. "Left side impact on the descent," she said. "Possible rib involvement." "Moving." A pause on his end. "Negative," she said immediately. "You stay with the element. I'm moving, Mercer." Logan's voice went to the team channel. "I need 60 seconds, Pike," Mercer said. 60 seconds, Logan said. "Request permission to assist Overwatch descent." The pause that followed was the length of a man weighing operational protocol against something more human and deciding, for once, to let the human thing win. 60 seconds, Mercer said. "Clock starts when you move." She heard footsteps on the lower path below her. Quick. Certain footsteps, the footsteps of a man who had made a decision and was executing it without ambiguity. And then Logan Pike appeared below her on the path, moving up toward her with the easy physical efficiency of someone who had been doing this for years. And when he reached her, he took one look at the way she was holding Greybird's case and the way she was breathing, and he said nothing at all. He just put his hand out for the case. She looked at him. He looked back. Not with the aggressive certainty of the man who had laughed at her rifle in the briefing hut. With the simple practical directness of a person who understood that this moment was not about pride or about debt, or about any of the complicated history that had existed between them for the past week. It was about getting down the mountain. She handed him the case. They moved. He didn't slow down for her. He matched her pace exactly, which was faster than comfortable and slower than optimal. And he did it without comment or adjustment, or any of the patronizing accommodation that would have made the gesture smaller than it was. He just moved with her, carrying Greybird, and left her hands and her balance and her dignity. Halfway down the remaining section, he said, the timing thing. The rehearsal. She kept moving. What about it? I knew about the gap, he said. In the confirmation handoff. I'd been thinking about it for 2 days. She looked at him briefly. Why didn't you say it? A short pause, the honest pause of a person deciding to be honest rather than comfortable. Because I was waiting to see if it would actually matter. Waiting to see if the whole plan was going to hold together or fall apart before I invested in it. Before you invested in me, she said. Yes, he said, no defense, no qualification. They kept moving. Why are you telling me this now, she said. He thought about it for 4 steps. Then because you made the shot. And I want you to know that means something specific to me, not just the shot. The thing underneath the shot. The way you'd already solved for the bracket before anyone told you about the secondary relay. The way you built for the worst case nobody announced. Another pause. I've been operating for 8 years. I've never met anyone who thought like that. She said nothing for a moment. 2 seconds, she said finally. He went very still while still moving. Which was its own kind of discipline, Evan told me, she said. No, not as gossip, as context. So I could understand what I was actually dealing with in that room. Logan was quiet. 2 seconds in that situation, she said, is not a moral failing. It's a human moment in a situation that was designed to be faster than humans. She navigated a loose section of the failure would have been to not carry it at all. The failure would have been to let it become nothing. You carried it, you let it change you. That's not weakness. He was quiet for a long time. I almost cost someone their life, he said. Yes, she said. And you have been paying for it in the wrong currency ever since. She glanced at him. Bravado doesn't cancel a debt like that. But what you just did coming back up this mountain with 60 seconds, that's a payment that means something. He said nothing. They reached the bottom of the mountain. Mercer was there. He looked at Logan, then at Mara, then at the rifle case in Logan's hands, and something moved across his face that was too complicated to name in the dark and the cold and the 40 seconds left before the extraction vehicles needed to move. He said, "Can you travel?" "Yes," she said. "Then let's go home," he said. The extraction vehicles were already running when they reached them. Was loaded. Race was loaded. All 12 engineers were loaded. And the moment Mara and Logan cleared the rear door, the convoy moved. She sat in the back with her back against the vehicle wall and let herself feel the ribs for the first time. They were bad, not catastrophic, not punctured lung bad, but the specific grinding complaint of bones that had been impacted and were now filing a formal protest with every breath. She breathed through it with the focused evenness of a person who has learned to compartmentalize physical discomfort the way you compartmentalize any other kind of data present. Noted, filed, not in charge. Kane was across from her. He was pale and he was tired, and his leg was immobilized against a field splint that Logan had applied in the back of the vehicle with practiced hands and a silence that said more about his competence than any demonstration could. But his eyes were sharp and present, and tracking everything, with the specific alertness of a man who had been saving himself up for the moment when saving himself would matter. He looked at Mara. "You're the shooter," he said. "Yes, the relay, yes." He looked at her for a long moment. 9 days in that room, he said. I kept thinking about whoever was going to make that shot. Kept running the geometry in my head, the canyon, the wind, the bracket. A pause. I told myself it was possible. I needed it to be possible. It was possible, she said. I can see that. He looked at Greybird's case. Is that it? Yes, he nodded slowly. The nod of a man who has been keeping faith with something abstract for 9 days and is now, finally, in the presence of the concrete reality of it. Thank you, he said. Not with the expansive gratitude of someone performing emotion. With the precise, direct gratitude of a 54-year-old intelligence officer who spent his life among people who understood that some things only need to be said once and said simply. You're welcome, Mara said. She leaned her head back against the vehicle wall. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep, but she let herself exist. For a few minutes, without the weight of the next decision pressing on her, in the clean space that opens up after a thing has been done and done right, before the accounting begins. Graybird's case was between her feet. She kept one hand on it. Mercer came to her at the 4 hours after extraction, while the medical team was taping her ribs and telling her things about bone contusion and restricted activity that she was listening to with approximately 20% of her attention. He waited until they were done. He waited until the room was empty. And then he sat down in the chair across from her, not the head of the table, not the commanding position, just a chair across from another chair, and he put his hands together and he looked at her. She waited. The bracket, he said. I want to understand something. At what point did you know? Know what specifically? That the bracket was the right target, not the housing, the bracket. She considered the question honestly, because he was asking it honestly and that deserved a real answer. Before I saw the mission brief, she said. The relay system architecture, any relay system in that operational category has redundancy built to the housing. That's standard. The bracket is structural. The bracket doesn't have redundancy because nobody thinks to protect the bracket. Nobody thinks the bracket is the target, except you, except me. He looked at his hands. In the iron sight. When the primary optic went down, I had the backup configuration in Caleb's tables, she said. He built for the worst case. You built for the worst case, Mercer said. You came into that briefing room on day one having already built for the worst case. He paused. I spent that same day deciding you were the worst case. The honesty of it landed in the room and neither of them moved away from it. You weren't the first, she said. No, he said. But I should have been smarter than the pattern. He looked at her directly. I picked up your rifle without asking. I said what I said in front of the entire unit. And I spent the next 4 days looking for evidence that I was right instead of looking for evidence of what was actually true. He paused. That's not operational judgment. That's prejudice with a rank attached to it. She held his gaze. Yes, she said. He didn't flinch. He'd walked in here to hear that. He'd come here specifically because he needed to hear it acknowledged clearly, by her in a room with no audience, not as punishment, but as the kind of accurate information that a person who genuinely wants to be better needs to receive and hold without minimizing it. I have a question, she said. Ask it. The 90 seconds, she said. On the channel. When I asked for 90 seconds and you gave them to me. He waited. You'd spent 4 days being wrong about me, she said. You knew it by then. But you still had to make that call in the dark, in real time, with 13 lives and a 4-minute vehicle window and a plan that had just had its optics fail. You gave me the 90 seconds. She looked at him. What made you do it? He was quiet for a moment. Not evasive thinking. The shadow, he said finally. She waited. Day 2, the observer. The shadow you caught that nobody else saw. He paused. I went back and looked at it afterward. I stood in that exact spot and I looked at that wall and I tried to see what you saw. And I couldn't see it. Not right away. I had to work at it. I had to force myself to stop looking at the exercise and start looking at everything. He met her eyes. And when I finally saw it, the thing you saw in 3 seconds while you were moving, I understood that your eyes and your brain work in a way that is genuinely different from how mine work. Not better in every way, different in specific ways that matter for specific problems. And the Karif problem was your specific problem. She nodded slowly. So when you asked for 90 seconds, he said I gave them to you. Because the data said I should. Not because I wanted to. Not because it was comfortable. He leaned back. Because the data said so. That's enough, she said. That's actually enough. He stood up. He looked at her for a moment with the particular expression of a man who has more to say and is deciding whether this is the moment for it or whether the moment has already been sufficient. He picked up his cover from the table. The unit debrief is at 800, he said. You don't have to give the shot. I can give it. I'll give it, she said. He nodded. He walked to the door. He stopped. Your uncle, he said, without turning around. He built something worth keeping. She looked at Graybird's case. He built everything worth keeping, she said. Mercer walked out. She sat alone in the medical room with her taped ribs and her uncle's rifle and the specific, exhausted clarity of a person who has just moved through the worst case and come out the other side still themselves. Still intact, still holding what mattered outside. Karif's mountains were dark and cold and enormous and entirely indifferent to what had just happened inside them. She put her hand on the case. She breathed in. She breathed out. The ribs complained. She let them. The debrief started at 800. And the room was full in a way it hadn't been full since the first day. Same 14 people. Same table, same Nevada light coming through the same windows. But the weight of the room was different. The air had changed the way air changes after a storm passes through. When everything is still wet and sharp and slightly rearranged from where it used to be. Mercer stood at the head of the table. He didn't open with the mission summary. He didn't open with the timeline or the extraction numbers or the confirmed status of all 13 recovered personnel. He opened with something that cost him something, and everyone in the room understood that immediately because they had spent 8 days watching Grant Mercer spend nothing he didn't have to. Before we begin the operational review, he said, I need to say something that belongs at the front of this debrief, not at the end of it. The room went quiet, the specific quiet of people who sense that something real is about to happen. I made a judgment call on day 1 of this operation that was not a judgment call, Mercer said. It was a reflex. I looked at Chief Ellison's equipment and I looked at Chief Ellison and I made a decision about both of them before I had a single piece of operational evidence to support it. He paused, and then I spent 4 days looking for evidence that confirmed what I'd already decided instead of looking at what was actually in front of me. Nobody moved. That is not how I was trained to think, he said. It is not how I train others to think. And it is not how this unit will operate going forward. He looked at Mara directly. Chief Ellison, I owe you an apology that is specific and public, because the disrespect was specific and public. The room held its breath. Mara looked at him steadily. She had known this was coming. Mercer had told her he was going to say it, in the medical room the night before, because Grant Mercer was a man who did difficult things with preparation and precision, not with impulse. But knowing it was coming and hearing it delivered in front of the entire unit were 2 different experiences, and she let herself feel the second one honestly rather than managing it from a distance. I hear you, she said, not it's fine and not I forgive you, because neither of those things was what the moment required. What the moment required was acknowledgement, and acknowledgement was what she gave him. Thank you for saying it in front of everyone. Mercer nodded. One clean nod. The nod of a man who understands that an apology received is not an apology completed, that what comes after the words matters more than the words. Now he said, let's talk about what happened out there. The operational review took 2 hours, and Mara insisted on giving all of it, not just the shot, not just the relay sequence, but every decision from the moment the drone changed course to the moment the last operator cleared the compound wall. She gave it methodically and without drama, the way Caleb had taught her to document things. Accurate, specific, generous in attribution. She gave Evans router work first. The secondary relay path was identified by Petty Officer Cole approximately 60 minutes before departure, she said. Without that identification, the bracket shot would have severed the primary signal path and left the secondary intact. The demolition trigger would have remained live. The operation would have failed at the moment of breach. She looked at Evan. He found it, confirmed it, and built the interrupt protocol in 60 minutes under time pressure with equipment he hadn't tested in that configuration. Evan was looking at the table. She watched him absorb it, not with false modesty, not with the deflection of someone uncomfortable with accurate credit, but with the genuine, slightly overwhelmed quality of a person receiving something they had not fully believed they deserved. Cole, Mercer said. Evan looked up. That is exactly correct, Mercer said. And it will be in the record. Evan nodded, said nothing. But the set of his shoulders changed. Something released that had been held since before Karif, before Nevada, possibly since before any of this. The held breath of a person who has been waiting a long time to find out whether they were actually as capable as they hoped or only as afraid as they felt. He exhaled. He looked like he'd set something down. Mara moved to Logan next. Senior Petty Pike was designated as primary rescue for Officer Kane, she said. What the mission record won't fully capture is what that designation actually meant under the conditions. Kane was on the 2nd floor, separated from the main hostage group, with a deteriorating leg wound and 9 days of accumulated physical compromise. She paused. Pike had him mobile and moving in under 4 minutes from initial contact, under active threat conditions, without support. He also made the decision to return up the mountain to assist Overwatch descent, which required him to read the operational situation accurately enough to understand that the 60 seconds he requested was available without jeopardizing the extraction. She looked at Logan. That is not a small thing. That is the decision of someone operating with full situational awareness under conditions that strip most people down to tunnel vision. Logan was very still. He was sitting the way he'd been sitting since the debrief began, straight, contained, with none of the performative ease of the first days in Nevada and none of the defensive tension of the days after that. He was sitting like himself, which was something she hadn't seen him do until the mountain, until the moment he'd handed her Greybird and they'd moved without talking about why. He looked at her. You built the plan for the bracket, he said. It wasn't a challenge. It was a statement in the form of an acknowledgement. I told Mercer the night before Wheels Up that the plan wouldn't hold. He stopped. I was wrong. You were working with incomplete information, she said. I was working with a complete refusal to update the information I had, he said. There's a difference. The room was very quiet. Yes, she said. There is. She held his gaze for one more second. Then she moved on to the operational data, the numbers, the timeline, the extraction metrics that would go into the classified record and stay there for the next 20 years. She moved through all of it with the same methodical precision, and the room moved with her, and the air in the room continued to rearrange itself into something different from what it had been. It was during the extraction phase of the review the vehicle convoy, the North Road, the 4-minute vehicle window, that the first thing nobody had been told came out. It came from one of the quiet operators at the back of the room. A man named Hartley, who had said perhaps 40 words in the entire 8 days, who had watched everything with the careful attention of someone who was always cataloging rather than performing. He raised his hand. Mercer looked at him. Hartley. The vehicle on the North Road, Hartley said. I want to confirm something. He looked at Mara. When you reported at the ETA, the vehicle weight assessment, you were already on the iron sight backup. You'd taken a fall on the upper descent. And you were running the extraction timing against the North Road vehicle timeline simultaneously with maintaining overwatch. It wasn't exactly a question. It was an observation delivered in the form of a question. The way precise people deliver observations they want confirmed without making it sound like they're already certain. Yes, Mara said. Hartley looked at Mercer. I want that in the record, he said. Specifically, because the summary is going to say the vehicle was reported by Overwatch, and somebody reading that in 3 years is going to think it was a standard call. It wasn't. It was a person managing 3 simultaneous high-priority problems with a physical injury and a degraded optics system and an iron sight backup that most people in this room couldn't use at half that distance. Under perfect conditions, the room absorbed that. Mercer wrote something down. It'll be in the record, he said. Hartley nodded and went back to his chair and said nothing more. And Mara understood something important about the quiet people who watched everything. They were not passive. They were accumulating. And when they finally spent what they'd accumulated, it landed with the specific weight of something that had been carefully saved for exactly this moment. She looked at Hartley and gave him the smallest possible nod, which was the largest acknowledgement the moment allowed and exactly the right size. He gave her the same nod back. The formal debrief ended at 19:15. What happened after was not formal. The room didn't empty the way rooms empty after meetings all at once, everyone moving toward the door with the shared relief of people released from obligation. It emptied slowly in fragments, people stopping to talk to each other in the specific way of a group that has been through something together and is still processing what together means now. Logan stopped at the door. He stopped with his back to the room for a moment. The way people stop when they have something to say and haven't yet decided whether to say it in the room or outside it. Then he turned around. Mara, he said. Everyone remaining in the room heard it. He used her name, not her rank, not her last name, not the half-deferential, half-hostile Ellison of the Nevada Training Week. Her name. The way you use a name when you've decided that a person is a person to you and not a category. She looked at him. I said you couldn't make the shot, he said. I said it out loud, on the channel. In front of everyone, I remember. I need you to know that I knew you could. He said it plainly, without drama, with the specific courage of someone delivering a truth that makes themselves look worse, not better. Not before the demonstration. Before the demonstration I genuinely didn't know. But in the compound, when I had you in my binoculars on that hillside, I knew you were going to make it. He paused. And I said you couldn't anyway. Because I was still. He stopped, started again. I was still trying to be the person who was right instead of the person who was honest. The room held. I know, she said. He looked at her. I heard it in your voice, she said. On the channel. The way you said it. She paused. You weren't telling Mercer. You were telling yourself. Trying to make yourself believe it one more time. Something moved across Logan's face. The specific unguarded expression of a person who has been seen more completely than they expected and is deciding whether to close back up or let the seeing stand. He let it stand. I'm sorry, he said. You came up the mountain, she said. With 60 seconds. That's not Logan. She said his name the same way he'd said hers, with the weight of a decision to make it real. That's not a small thing. Don't shrink it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. Once and he walked out. The room breathed. Evan, who had been sitting at the far end of the table through all of it, stood up and started gathering his equipment. He worked quietly, methodically, with the contained focus of someone who had somewhere internal to be and needed a moment to get there. Evan, she said. He looked up. The router node, she said. You had 60 minutes in gear you hadn't tested in that configuration. I want to know, when did you stop being afraid of it? He thought about it. When I stopped asking whether I was good enough to do it, he said, and started asking what the next step was. A pause. Somewhere around minute 20, I just stopped auditing myself and started working. That's it, she said. That's the whole thing. He smiled, not carefully. Not the careful half smile of a person checking whether smiling is allowed. A real smile. The smile of someone who has recently discovered that they are larger than they thought they were and is just beginning to occupy the additional space. You taught me that, he said. You already knew it, she said. You just needed someone to tell you it was true. He picked up his equipment. He started for the door, then he stopped. Mara, he said. For what it's worth, that shot, the iron sight, the 1.4 seconds. He shook his head slowly. I was right next to you and I still don't fully understand how you did it. Neither do I, she said honestly. Not completely. That's why I keep practicing, he laughed. A short, genuine laugh that surprised him slightly. Then he walked out. She was alone in the room. The knock on the door came 20 minutes later. While she was collecting the last of the mission documentation and preparing to turn it over to the operational archive team. It was a soft knock, not tentative, not commanding. The knock of someone who had something specific to do and was doing it at the right time. Which was now. She said, "Come in." Thomas Kane came through the door. He was on crutches, both legs now, because the medical team had insisted on non-weight bearing for the extraction wound during the initial recovery phase, and Kane had apparently argued with 3 different doctors before accepting a compromise that involved the crutches and significantly reduced his scheduled argument time. He moved well on them. He moved like a man who had decided that crutches were a logistical problem and not a personal comment, and who was therefore solving the logistics without feeling the comment. He came to the table and sat down across from her. You didn't come to the debrief, she said. I was in medical, he said. Again. He said again with the weary precision of a man who had spent his career in rooms where the medicine was slower than the problem. They gave me the summary. The summary doesn't have everything. No, he said. Summaries never do. That's why I came to find you. She waited. He put his hands on the table, scarred hands. The hands of someone who had spent decades doing things with them that didn't make the official record. He looked at them for a moment, the way people look at their hands when they're gathering something. 9 days, he said. I told you the math in the vehicle. I kept running the geometry of the shot in my head. The canyon, the wind, the bracket. He paused. What I didn't tell you is that I also kept thinking about who was going to be on the other end of it. She listened. In my work, he said, I spend a lot of time thinking about the variables that people don't account for. The human variables. The person in the room variables that don't show up in any model or any briefing document. He met her eyes. I thought about what kind of person could make that shot. And I built a very specific picture. What was the picture, she said. Patient, he said, meticulous. Comfortable with uncertainty in a way most people aren't, not because they don't feel it, but because they've built a relationship with it. Someone who could wait for the window without fighting the waiting. He paused. And someone who had something to prove, which is not always the same as someone with something to lose. She was quiet. I was wrong about that last part, he said. About the something to prove? About what it meant. He leaned forward slightly. I assumed it would make the person reckless. That the need to prove something would create pressure that deformed judgment at the critical moment. He shook his head. You didn't have something to prove. You had something to protect. She looked at him. The rifle, he said, your uncle's work. 11 years of your own work. The people in that compound. He paused. And something else, some standard that you carry around that's bigger than any single shot or any single mission. A standard about what this kind of work is supposed to mean. He held her gaze. That's not something to prove, that's something to protect. And people who protect something are more accurate than people who prove something. Every time. You analyzed me, she said. Not accusingly. It's what I do, he said. For 23 years it's what I do. A pause. I'm also very good at being wrong about people and very bad at admitting it. Ask anyone who knows me. He almost smiled, but I'm not wrong about this. She looked at Greybird's case. Leaning against the wall beside the table. My uncle built that rifle to serve, she said. Not to be proved right about, not to become a legend. To serve. She paused. I've been carrying that instruction for 3 years and I don't think I fully understood it until I was on the hillside with the iron sight. And the window was 1.4 seconds and there was nothing left to do except be exactly what the moment needed. Kane nodded slowly. What did it feel like, he said. She thought about it honestly. Like stopping, she said. Like all the noise, everything people had said. Everything I'd been carrying, every proof I'd been asked to provide, like it stopped. And there was just the bracket, the wind, the moment. She paused. Like the most quiet I've ever been inside. Kane was quiet for a long moment. I've been in this work for 23 years, he said finally. I've seen 2 people in my career who had what you have. That specific quality, that ability to become still at the moment when everything demands urgency. He looked at her. One of them changed the way the agency trains field assessment. The other changed how a generation of analysts thinks about human intelligence. He paused. You're going to change something too. I don't know what yet. But something. She looked at him. Don't put me in a display case, she said. I've had enough of that, he laughed. A real laugh, surprised and genuine. The laugh of a man who doesn't do it often and therefore means it completely when he does. No display cases, he said. Just pay attention to what you do next. Because what you do next is going to matter more than what you did last night. She sat with that for a moment. What are you going to do next, she asked. He looked at his leg. Spend approximately 6 to 8 weeks listening to doctors tell me things I already know, and pretending to be surprised by them. He paused. And then probably go back to doing what I do, because I've been doing it for 23 years and I'm not built for anything else. He met her eyes. Same as you. He stood up on the crutches. He moved toward the door with the unhurried efficiency of a man who had made his peace with the pace he currently had and was working it without complaint. At the door he stopped. The bracket shot, he said, without turning around. I want you to know something. I was a targeting analyst before I went into the field. 15 years ago, before all of this, he paused. I ran the numbers last night. Lying in the medical ward. Nothing else to do. Another pause, the 1.4-second window. The iron sight, the backup ballistic configuration, the temperature differential and the split current. He was quiet for a moment that was slightly longer than necessary. The probability of that shot under those exact conditions is something I am not going to say out loud because I don't want it to become a thing you have to carry. He opened the door. Just know it matters, he said, not the improbability. The fact that you made it anyway. He walked out. She sat alone for a long time. The second knock came an hour later. She almost didn't hear it because she was at the rifle bench outside the briefing hut, cleaning Graybird in the afternoon light, doing the work that Caleb had taught her to do when everything else was too large for any sentence. The knock came from the frame of the open doorway. Mercer, standing with his back straight and his cover in his hands and an expression she hadn't seen on him before, which was the expression of a man who has something to give and has thought carefully about how to give it correctly. He was holding the rifle case, not Graybird. She had Graybird. The empty case. He'd picked it up from the briefing room after the debrief. She hadn't asked him to. He'd done it because it was hers and it mattered to her, and those two facts, apparently, were now sufficient reason for Grant Mercer to carry something. He crossed to her and held it out with both hands. She looked at it. It was never the wrong gun, he said. He said it quietly, without preamble, the way you say something that has been true for a long time and that you are finally saying with all of its weight. I was asking the wrong person to prove what I had already refused to see. She took the case from him. He had practiced the words. She could hear that. Not in the way of insincerity, but in the way of someone who had understood that certain things deserve more care than you give to improvisation. He had worked out exactly what the honest thing was, and he had found the precise language for it, and he had delivered it without softening any of it. I know you've heard worse, he said, and I know one apology doesn't balance whatever accounting you've been keeping since the first room that treated you like this one did. I don't keep an accounting, she said. He looked at her. I used to, she said. It wasn't useful. She looked at the case, then at him. What I keep is something different. A record of who changes when the evidence requires it and who doesn't. She met his eyes. You changed, later than I should have, yes, she said. But you changed. That's not nothing, that's actually most of it. He held her gaze. The expression on his face was not relief, it was something more serious than relief. Something that carried the specific gravity of a man who has been handed a standard to hold and is deciding to hold it seriously. I'm going to be different in the next room, he said. Not better at my job, better at what my job is supposed to make possible. She looked at him for a moment. Then the next person who walks into your briefing hut, she said, won't have to make a shot like that one to be heard. He nodded. That's the point, she said. That was always the point. He put his cover back on. He straightened it, with the practiced gesture of 20 years. He looked at Graybird, half cleaned on the bench, and then at Mara, and something in the look had the quality of a final assessment, not the assessment of the first day, which had been a closing judgment, but the assessment of a person who was opening something instead of closing it, filing something under understood rather than under decided. Get some rest, he said. You look like you took a mountain to the ribs. I did, she said. How bad? 2, maybe 3, he winced. The involuntary wince of a person with enough field experience to know exactly what 2 or 3 rib contusions feel like for the next 6 to 8 weeks. The medical team filed a report, he said. I know. You're going to be in administrative status for I know, she said. A pause. Graybird, he said. What are you going to do with her? She looked at the rifle. Keep using her, she said. Keep training with her. Keep building shooters who understand that the point of a rifle is the shot, not the approval of the room. He almost smiled. Your uncle would have liked that answer. He gave me that answer, she said. Mercer walked away. She finished cleaning Graybird as the Nevada afternoon light moved across the bench, and the desert held its vast, different silence around her, the same silence it had always held. Full of information if you knew how to read it, and empty of mercy if you didn't. She thought about what Kane had said, about what you do next mattering more than what you did last night. She thought about the young candidates who would go through the next qualification cycle. She thought about the rooms they would walk into, and the cases they would open, and the silence that would drop over those rooms when someone decided they'd already seen enough to know. She thought about what it would mean to change that, not with one shot, not with one mission, not with one apology received in a briefing room in Nevada, but with a standard, held consistently, over time, in every room where the decision to see clearly or refuse to see was made one person at a time. She put Graybird back in the case. She closed it. She sat for a moment in the afternoon light with her taped ribs and her uncle's rifle, and the accumulated weight of everything that had happened since she drove through that gate 11 days ago. And she let herself feel all of it, not managed from a distance. Not filed under information, but actually felt, the way Caleb had taught her to feel the shot before the shot, fully present in the moment of it, not ahead of it and not behind it. Then she picked up the case. She stood up. She walked toward whatever came next. The administrative status lasted 6 weeks, 6 weeks of desk work, physical therapy 3 times a week, and the particular, grinding patience required of a person who is used to operating at full capacity and is being told by 2 fractured ribs and a medical report that full capacity is temporarily unavailable. Mara did not handle it gracefully, she handled it honestly, which meant some mornings she sat on the edge of her cot in her quarters at the Fallon facility and breathed through the stiffness with her jaw tight and her hands still. And then she got up and did what the day required, and she did not complain to anyone about the difference between those two things. What she did instead was think. She had a lot of time to think, which was both the gift and the difficulty of enforced stillness for someone whose mind did not stop moving simply because her body had been asked to. She thought about Karif. She thought about the bracket. She thought about the 1.4 seconds and the iron sight and the specific quality of silence that had descended on her at the moment of the shot, that extraordinary, internal quiet that she had described to Kane and had not been able to fully describe since, because the language for it didn't quite exist in the vocabulary of operational debriefs or medical reports or any of the official documents that were now, somewhere in a classified archive, attempting to record what had happened on that mountain. She thought about what Kane had said, about what you do next mattering more than what you did last night. She thought about the next room, the next person. The next rifle case opened in front of a unit that had already decided. On the 3rd week of administrative status, the call came from Washington. Not a message. Not a memo routed through the chain of command. A direct call, which in Mara's experience meant one of two things. Either something had gone wrong with the mission record, in a way that required her immediate attention, or something was being offered that the people doing the offering didn't want to put in writing until they knew whether she was going to say yes. She picked up on the second ring. The voice on the other end belonged to a rear admiral she had met once, briefly at a Naval Special Warfare conference 3 years earlier, a woman named Patricia Strand, who had the reputation of being the kind of flag officer who said exactly what she meant and meant exactly what she said, and who had spent the last decade building programs that most of the Navy had initially dismissed and eventually couldn't imagine operating without. Chief Ellison, Strand said. Are you sitting down? Yes. Ma'am, good. Because what I'm about to offer you is going to make you want to stand up, and I need you to stay calm long enough to hear all of it before you respond. The program had a working title and a classified designation and, more importantly, a mandate that Strand described in terms that Mara had to make herself listen to carefully rather than react to immediately, because reacting immediately was the wrong approach to something this significant, and she knew it. A joint service precision evaluation program. Not a training pipeline in the conventional sense. Not another qualification course with established metrics and familiar benchmarks. Something different, a program built on a fundamental revision of how the military identified and developed precision shooting talent across all branches, at all levels, with an assessment methodology grounded entirely in measurable performance rather than reputation, appearance, equipment preference, or the endorsement of whoever happened to be the senior person in the room at the time of evaluation. The Karif operation, Strand said, generated a specific kind of attention at the command level, not because of the shot itself, though the shot is. Frankly, Something people are going to be talking about for a long time in the right circles. Because of the conditions under which it was made, a pause, an iron sight backup, a non-standard ballistic configuration, a physical injury sustained mid-operation, and a unit that, according to the mission record and 3 separate after-action testimonies, spent the first 4 days of the operational period actively resisting the incorporation of the person who made that shot. Mara said nothing. That last part, Strand said, is not a new story. You know that, I know that. Everyone who has worked in joint service environments for more than 5 years knows that. What is new is that this time the after-action testimonies naming the resistance are coming from the people who did the resisting. A pause. Mercer's testimony, Pike's, Cole's, all 3 of them documented on the record in a classified archive the specific ways in which their initial resistance to your incorporation compromised the early phase of mission preparation. Mara sat with that for a moment. They put it in writing, she said. Every word of it, Strand said. Mercer's testimony alone is 4 pages. He describes the briefing room incident, the training period, the demonstration shot, and what he calls, and I'm quoting, a systematic failure of operational judgment that I will spend the remainder of my career working to correct. A pause. 4 pages. Chief Ellis spaced. The room was very quiet. The program needs someone to lead it, Strand said. Someone who can build the assessment framework from the ground up. Someone who understands precision shooting at the highest technical level and also understands, from direct personal experience, exactly what the human factors look like when they go wrong. Another pause. Someone who made an iron sight shot at that distance, with that load in a 1.4-second window, with 2 fractured ribs after 4 days of active institutional resistance. You're offering me the program, Mara said. I'm offering you the program, Strand said. The question is whether you want it or whether you want to go back to operational status when medical clears you. Mara looked at Graybird's case, leaning against the wall the way it always leaned against whatever wall she happened to be near. Close enough to reach but not in the way both, she said. A brief pause on Strand's end explained the program needs someone actively operational, Mara said. Not someone who has retired into administration. The credibility of a performance-based assessment framework depends on the person running it being currently demonstrably capable of the performance being assessed. The moment I become a desk officer, the program starts losing the thing that makes it different from every other program that tried to do this and failed. Silence. You want operational status and program command simultaneously, Strand said. I want the program to be built on the principle that the people evaluating performance are performing themselves, Mara said. That's not a personal preference. That's a structural requirement. The framework has to be led by someone the candidates can see. Someone they can watch make the shot, not just someone who used to make it. Another silence. Longer. That's going to require a precedent, Strand said. Yes, ma'am, Mara said it is. A pause that lasted long enough for Mara to understand that Strand was not hesitating because she disagreed. She was pausing because she was deciding how to build the argument she was going to make to the 3 people above her who would need to sign off on the precedent. Give me 2 weeks, Strand said finally. I have 4 left on administrative status, Mara said. I'll be here, Strand almost laughed. It was a small sound, brief, precise, the laugh of a person who has spent 40 years in institutions that resist change and has developed a specific appreciation for the kind of mind that proposes more change in response to resistance. 2 weeks, she said, and she hung up. Evan called that same evening. He called from a number she didn't recognize, which meant he was calling from somewhere he wasn't supposed to be calling from, which was consistent with everything she knew about how Evan Cole operated when he had something he considered important enough to be worth the administrative friction of making the call anyway. I heard about the program, he said. She looked at the phone. How did you hear about the program? I have good signal intelligence, he said. And she heard the smile in it, the real smile, the one that had opened up in the debrief room when she'd credited his router work and the set of his shoulders had changed. Also, Mercer told me. Mercer told you. Mercer called me this morning and told me that if you accepted a program command, he thought I should volunteer as a communications instructor before someone else got the position. A pause, which I'm choosing to interpret as a compliment from Mercer, since Mercer's compliments tend to come delivered inside other sentences. She sat back. Are you interested? I'm calling you from a number I'm going to have to explain to my unit's comms officer tomorrow morning, he said. What do you think? I think you should be the first hire, she said. If the program gets approved. A pause. If? Triss needs 2 weeks to build the argument upstairs. She'll get it, Evan said, with the specific, calm certainty of a person who has assessed the variables and arrived at a conclusion he's confident in. She's been trying to build this program for 4 years. She just didn't have the right operational evidence until Karif. You've been tracking Strand's program history. I've been tracking anything that might change how people like me get evaluated, he said. And then more quietly, people like us. The word us landed in a way that neither of them acknowledged directly, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. Evan, she said. What you did with the router node. The 60-minute configuration under time pressure. You know that's not normal, right? A pause. It felt normal to me. That's exactly what I mean, she said. He was quiet for a moment. The program, he said. What's it actually going to do? Pass the official language. It's going to change what the question is, she said. Right now, the question that gets asked in every evaluation room is, does this person look like what we expect a capable person to look like? The program is going to replace that with, what can this person actually do? Under what conditions, with what equipment, and how do we measure it accurately? She paused. It's going to make the room irrelevant. The only thing that's going to matter is the performance. Silence on the line. That's going to make a lot of people uncomfortable, Evan said. Yes, she said, it is good, he said simply. And she understood that the word carried the accumulated weight of every room he had ever been in, where his capability had been filtered through someone else's expectation of what capability was supposed to look like. Get some sleep, she said. You're going to need to be ready to argue for your own hire in 2 weeks. I've been ready for that argument my entire career, he said. And he hung up. Logan called 3 days later. She had not expected Logan to call. She had expected, if anything, a message through official channels, the kind of formal, structured communication that Logan Pike used when he was being professional. She had not expected him to pick up a phone and call her the way a person calls someone they've decided is a person to them. He opened with, I heard you might be building something. Word travels fast, she said. Mercer, he said. He called Evan. Evan told 4 people. I'm apparently the last person in the unit to find out. Which is either a statement about my communication networks or about how much Mercer trusts me relative to everyone else. Probably both, she said. A short laugh. Brief, real, probably. A pause, and she could feel him gathering himself toward something he'd decided to say and was determining the right approach for. I want to be involved. She waited. Not as an instructor, he said. Not officially, not yet, another pause, but the pressure component. The hesitation management. The thing I spent 3 months after my last deployment trying to outrun and then spent a week in Nevada trying to hide from you. He stopped. I know what that looks like from the inside. I know every version of it, the bravado version, the aggression version, the I'll just perform certainty until it becomes certainty version. His voice was flat and direct and stripped of everything except the essential truth of it. I know how those coping mechanisms fail. And I know what it costs when they fail at the wrong moment. You want to work with candidates on pressure management, she said. I want to make sure nobody else carries 2 seconds the way I carried them, he said. I want to make sure the next person who hesitates for whatever reason, in whatever situation, has somewhere to take it that isn't just more pressure and more performance and a culture that treats hesitation as a character flaw instead of a physiological event that can be trained. The silence that followed was the silence of a significant thing being said simply. Logan, she said. Yeah. That's the most important part of the whole program, she said. What you just described, that's the center of it. A pause. Don't tell Mercer I said it that way. He'll make a whole thing of it. Mercer already knows, she said. He documented it in 4 single-spaced pages. Another silence. Then very quietly he did every word, she said. Logan was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she gave him the silence. Because some things need room to land completely before there's any point in speaking again. Okay, he said finally. Just that, okay. The word of a person who has just received information that changes the size of something they've been carrying and is in the process of adjusting to the new weight. Get me in the room, he said, when it's time. Get me in the room and I'll do the rest. I will, she said. She meant it. She hung up and sat for a moment with all 3 calls arranged in her mind like a ballistic calculation, the variables, the load, the wind, the bracket, and understood that what she was building was not a program. It was a condition. A condition in which the next person who walked into the wrong room with the right rifle would not have to survive the room before they could do the work. Strand called back in 11 days. Not 14. You have the precedent, she said. Operational status and program command. Concurrent. There are conditions. There are always conditions, Mara said. Quarterly performance documentation. Active operational status maintained at a minimum qualifying standard. Program assessment metrics reviewed at 6 months and 12 months. With demonstrated outcome data. A pause. And one more thing, tell me, the program can't be named after you, Strand said. Or after the Karif operation, or after Greybird. A pause. The people upstairs are concerned about the program becoming associated with a single person or a single event, rather than with the principle it's built on. Mara looked at Greybird's case. Name it after the principle, she said. What principle? Performance speaks, she said. That's the whole thing, that's everything. Performance speaks, not reputation, not appearance, not equipment, not the endorsement of whoever has the most rank in the room. Performance speaks, and we measure it accurately, and we let the measurement be the answer. Silence on Strand's end. Then performance speaks. Yes, ma'am, that'll work, Strand said. And the warmth in her voice was the warmth of someone who has been building toward something for a long time and has just heard it named correctly for the first time. Welcome to Program Command, Chief Ellison. The first thing Mara did with the program was not design a curriculum. It was not build an assessment framework or write a mission statement or schedule a staff meeting or any of the things that program commands traditionally did in their first week of existence. The first thing she did was call the 12 engineers from Carif. Not officially, not through any government channel. She called them one at a time over 3 days using contact information that Thomas Kane had quietly forwarded to her with a note that said only, "They should hear from you directly." She didn't call to tell them about the program. She didn't call to explain what had happened on the mountain or to describe the shot or to receive their gratitude, which several of them offered immediately and which she accepted simply and without deflection. She called because Kane had said something that stayed with her, that she had something to protect, and she had realized, somewhere in the 6 weeks of administrative status and fractured ribs and long thinking, that the 12 engineers and Thomas Kane were not the people she had protected on the mountain. They were the reason the protection mattered, the specific, human irreducible reason that the work was not abstract, that the bracket and the window and the 1.4 seconds were not technical achievements but were 12 engineers who went home to their families and one CIA officer who went back to doing the work he'd done for 23 years. She needed to hear their voices. She needed the reason to be concrete before she started building something meant to serve it. The calls were short. Some of them were difficult. 2 of the engineers had not been sleeping well, and one had been seeing a trauma counselor. And one said simply that she'd had to leave a room 3 times in the last month because she'd heard a sound that reminded her of the compound, and her body hadn't understood that she was somewhere safe. Mara listened to all of it without rushing toward reassurance, because rushing toward reassurance was the wrong response to someone whose experience of difficulty deserved to be received honestly. "I'm glad you're home," she said to each of them. Not "I'm glad I could help," and not "I'm glad it worked out." Just, "I'm glad you're home." Because that was the only sentence that was entirely true and entirely about them rather than about her. The last call was Thomas Kane. "I heard you took the program," he said, before she could say anything. "News travels," she said. "I made sure it did," he said. "I told 3 people who needed to hear it." "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me, I was being selfish." A pause. "I wanted to make sure it happened. I've been watching programs like this get killed in committee for 15 years because nobody in the room could make the argument stick. You're the argument that sticks. The program has to outlast me," she said. "It can't be built around one person." "That's why you'll make sure it doesn't," he said. "That's the whole difference between the people who build institutions and the people who build cults of personality. You're already thinking about what it looks like when you're not in the room." A pause. "Most people don't start there. Caleb built a rifle to serve, not to be preserved," she said. "I'm trying to build the same way." Kane was quiet for a moment. "How are the ribs?" he said. "Angry," she said, getting less angry. "Good," he said. "You're going to need them." He hung up. She sat with the phone in her hand and Greybird's case against the wall in the particular, forward-looking clarity of someone who has finished one chapter so completely that the next one has already begun. The program's first cohort assembled 8 months later. 14 candidates, 7 different specialties, 4 branches of service. And on the first morning, before any assessment, before any demonstration, before any official program language had been delivered, Mara walked into the room the way she had walked into every room in her career, without announcement, without assistance, with Greybird's case in her hand. She set it on the table. She did not open it. She looked at the room. She looked at 14 people who were carrying the specific combination of confidence and uncertainty that everyone carries when they're about to be evaluated, the awareness that they are in a room that will decide something about them, and the question of whether the room will decide it fairly. "My name is Chief Petty Officer Mara Ellison," she said. "I am going to tell you one thing before we begin, and it is the only thing that matters in this program." The room was completely still. "You will be evaluated on what you can do," she said. "Not on what you look like, not on what equipment you carry, not on your reputation, your branch, your gender, your age, or the opinion of anyone who has evaluated you before today." She put her hand on Greybird's case. "What matters in this room is what happens when it has to count. Nothing else." She paused. "Any questions before we start?" A hand went up. Near the back. A young woman mid-20s, she estimated, with the self-contained stillness of someone who had been in enough rooms like this one to know that the first question either opened things up or closed them down. And who had decided to open? "What's in the case?" she said. The room turned. 14 people looking at Graybird's case, and then at Mara, waiting to see what she would do with the question. Mara looked at the young woman. She picked up the case. She opened it. "This," she said, "is a rifle built by a man named Caleb L., who spent 30 years in Navy precision shooting and 18 months building a single instrument that could do what the available systems couldn't." She looked at the rifle. It's scratched, the receiver is original, and it shows its age. The scope mount is custom, and it looks wrong until you understand what problem it's solving. She looked up. 3 months ago, with this rifle, using a backup iron sight, with 2 fractured ribs and a 1.4-second window across a canyon in a country most people haven't heard of, this rifle helped bring 13 people home. The room was absolutely silent. "It is not a beautiful rifle," she said. "It has never been a beautiful rifle. It is a rifle that works when it has to count." She closed the case. "That is the only standard that exists in this room. That is the only standard that will ever exist in this room." She set the case down. "Let's begin," she said. Evan ran the communications assessment for the first cohort. He ran it with the quiet, methodical precision of someone who had learned the difference between performing capability and actually demonstrating it, and who had decided that the demonstration was the only version worth giving. He told the candidates one thing at the start of his assessment, the thing Mara had told him on the rifle bench in Nevada, the thing that had moved from her voice into his body over the course of a week and a mountain and a 60-minute router configuration under time pressure. "Name the fear," he said, "then make the next decision. That's it. That's the whole thing." 3 candidates who had been performing competence for 2 solid days looked at him like he had said something in a language they already knew but had never heard spoken out loud. He let them sit with it. Logan came in on day 4. He came in without fanfare, without introduction, without any of the professional staging that people use when they're trying to establish authority in a room before they've said anything. He just came in and sat down in front of 12 candidates who had by then been pushed through 3 days of assessment and were carrying the specific, productive exhaustion of people who had been working at the edge of their capability. He looked at them. "I'm going to tell you something that nobody told me when I needed to hear it," he said. "And you're going to hear it now so you don't spend 3 months carrying what I carried after I needed it." He paused. Hesitation is not a character flaw, it is a physiological event. It happens to everyone in some form at some moment. The question is never whether you hesitated. The question is what you do with the next 2 seconds. A candidate near the front, a young man with the rigid posture of someone who had been told for years that certainty was the same as competence, looked at Logan with an expression that Mara, watching from the back of the room, recognized immediately. Recognition. The specific recognition of a person hearing their own interior experience named by someone else. Logan saw it too. "Yeah," Logan said, looking directly at him. "I know, me too." The candidate exhaled, a long, slow breath that carried something out of him that had been in there for a while. Logan kept going. Mercer came to observe on the final day of the first cohort's assessment cycle. He came in uniform, which told her it was official, and he sat in the back of the room with his cover in his hands and his face in the careful, open expression of a man who was there to receive information rather than to deliver it. He watched Mara run the final performance assessment, a full sequence evaluation that lasted 4 hours and measured every candidate against the framework she'd built, the metrics she'd designed, the standard that had no interest in anything except what happened when it had to count. He watched 3 candidates who had been written off in the early days of the cohort by other observers perform at a level that the assessment data recorded without editorial comment. He watched 2 candidates who had arrived with significant reputations and strong endorsements perform below their own stated capability, under the conditions the assessment created. He watched Mara move through the room not as an authority figure managing an evaluation, but as someone who was genuinely watching with the same quality of attention she brought to a wind corridor or a shadow pattern or a mountain at night, the attention of a person to whom the whole picture matters, not just the part of it that confirms what they expected to see. At the end of the day, when the candidates had been released and the room was emptying, he stayed. She walked over to him. He stood up. "Task Unit Trident," he said. "We have a new operator coming in next month. 24 years old. Different background from most of what we see. Strong technical record. Unconventional equipment preferences." He paused. "I wanted to ask you something before he arrives." "Ask it," she said. "What should I look for?" he said. "Not what the file says. Not what the numbers say." He met her eyes. "What should I look for that the file won't tell me?" She looked at him for a moment. Look for the shadow, she said. He blinked. The thing they see that nobody else sees, she said. The moment where their attention goes somewhere the exercise didn't tell it to go. That's the thing the file won't give you. She paused. Look for that, and then give them the time to show you what it means. He nodded slowly. The nod of a man receiving a teaching and deciding to keep it. The case, he said, looking at Graybird on the table. You're still using it every day, she said. Not in a display case.
Never.
Caleb built her to serve. Mercer looked at the rifle for a moment, then at Mara. Then he did something she had not seen Grant Mercer do in the entire month she'd worked with him. He smiled. Not the professional acknowledgement. Not the controlled expression of a senior operator managing his affect in a formal environment. A real smile, brief and unguarded, and carrying in it all the evidence of a man who had changed something real about himself and was living in the changed version and finding it, against every expectation, better than what came before. He built well, Mercer said. He did, she said, and so did every person he taught. Mercer picked up his cover. He put it on. He straightened it with the practiced gesture she had come to recognize as the period at the end of his sentences. Chief Ellison, he said. Senior Chief, she said. He walked out. That evening, alone in the assessment room, Mara opened Graybird's case one more time. She didn't clean the rifle. She just looked at it the way you look at something that has been with you through the most significant passage of your life, not with sentimentality, which was too simple, but with the complex, clear-eyed acknowledgement of everything the object represents, and everything it has cost, and everything it has made possible. She thought about Caleb in his garage in Colorado Springs. Evenings and weekends, 18 months of patient, precise loving work on a problem he had solved in his head long before he solved it in his hands. She thought about the note he had left her. She thought about the way the note was not an explanation or an instruction or a piece of advice, but a fact stated simply she's not for looking at. She's for when it has to count. She thought about the candidate who had asked what was in the case. A young woman with the self-contained stillness of someone who had been in enough wrong rooms to know that the first question mattered. She thought about the way the room had turned, 14 people looking at the case, and the way the opening of the case had been the opening of something else, a standard, a principle, a statement about what the room was for and what it would never be for again. She thought about the next cohort, and the one after that, and the one after that. She thought about all the rooms that would change because this room had existed, all the cases that would be opened without contempt, all the shadow moments that would be given time instead of judgment, all the people who would be evaluated on the only question that had ever been worth asking. What can you actually do? She closed the case. She stood up. She turned off the light. In every room that came after, in every assessment, every briefing, every moment when someone walked through a door carrying something nobody had expected, and waited to see whether the room would close or open, the standard held. Not because of the shot, though the shot was real and the record was permanent, and the bracket still lay somewhere in a classified archive. A small piece of sheared metal that had once stood between 13 people and the end of their lives. Not because of the rifle, though the rifle continued to work every time it was asked to and had never once required the room's approval to do so. Not because of any single person or any single moment or any single decision made in the dark on a mountain in a country most people hadn't heard of. Because of what Caleb Ellison had understood in his garage in Colorado Springs, working in the evenings, with his hands and his knowledge, and everything 30 years of precision shooting had taught him, that the point of the work was never the recognition. The point was the service. The point was showing up fully, building carefully, and being exactly what the moment required. When the moment arrived, regardless of whether the room believed you could, regardless of whether anyone had thought to give you permission, regardless of everything except the simple, unassailable truth of what happened when it had to count. The rifle served, the program held, the standard stood, and the next person who walked through the door carrying something nobody had expected would not have to survive the room's contempt before they could do the work. That was the shot that mattered most, not the one across the canyon, the one that changed what came after.